The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has raged for over 70 years. Over 20,000 lives have been lost, billions in aid poured in, and yet peace remains elusive. But how does this regional conflict affect the whole world? How do big power politics, money interests, and opposing beliefs play out in Israeli and Palestinian relations? America's special relationship with Israel shapes its foreign policy. Russia and China compete for influence by selling arms and building infrastructure. Europe walks a tightrope between strategic interests and humanitarian ideals. And caught in the middle lie the people with most at stake, Israelis and Palestinians. Their daily lives and futures held hostage by political forces beyond their control. In this video, we'll look at how the conflict connects globally, see how the big powers continue to tie a regional wound to worldwide effects, and understand the views of those most impacted by decisions made in distant diplomatic halls. There's a lot to unpack, so let's get started. The origins of the conflict. To understand this conflict, we need to go back to its origins. In the late 19th century, the Zionist movement emerged, which called for establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire. With the British conquest of Palestine during WWI, the push for a Jewish state intensified. However, the local Arab population also grew increasingly concerned about their future as the number of Jewish immigrants rose. Tensions boiled over into widespread violence between Jews and Arabs throughout the 1920s and 1930s as both sought control. Then, amidst the massive displacement of Jews due to the Holocaust, the UN voted in 1947 to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. While the Jews accepted the plan, the Arabs rejected it, leading to the First Arab-Israeli War. Israel emerged victorious, expanding its territory beyond the UN borders. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, marking the start of a refugee crisis that still exists today. So in summary, competing nationalist movements, claims to the same land, and devastating global events like the Holocaust all set the stage for decades of conflict to come. With this background, let's move on to discussing the global impacts. The geopolitical importance of Israel and Palestine. At the heart of this conflict are two main regions, Israel and the Palestinian territories in Gaza and the West Bank. Why has control of these lands been so important on the global stage? It comes down to location and resources. First, location. Israel and Palestine sit at the junction of the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Desert. This connects them not just to the oil-rich Middle East, but to Africa, Europe, and Asia. For major powers like the US and former USSR, influencing this strategic crossroads was key during the Cold War to access and project power in nearby regions. Second are natural resources. The Middle East contains over half of global oil reserves and a third of natural gas reserves. With the industrialized world heavily dependent on these energy sources, any instability in the region can affect oil prices worldwide. This gives countries like the US incentive to ensure Israel's security and prevent disruption. But beyond material impacts, the conflict has also affected politics, diplomacy, and security in profound ways. Impact on international politics and alliances. This brings us to the significant influence of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on international politics and alliances across the globe. In the Middle East, it has shaped regional balances of power, engagement with outside actors, and even domestic politics. Let's explore some examples. First, it has impacted Middle East alliances. Israel aligned with Western powers like the US, while many Arab states sided with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Today, several Gulf monarchies have quietly built ties with Israel based on shared concerns over Iran's influence. However, most Arab nations still support the Palestinian cause. Looking outside the region, the conflict has also affected foreign alliances and interventions. The US provides billions in annual military aid to Israel and uses its veto power in the UN Security Council to block resolutions critical of Israeli actions. European powers like France have taken a more pro-Palestinian stance at times. The conflict has also drawn in other powers like Iran, which provides arms and funds to militant Palestinian groups. Domestically, the conflict has shaped politics too. Hardline stances on Israel help galvanize conservative support in US elections, and regimes across the Middle East have leveraged anti-Israel sentiment to bolster their nationalist credentials. So in many ways, the conflict has been intertwined with international alliances and domestic politics globally. Next, let's examine how it has impacted diplomacy. Influence on diplomacy and conflict resolution. the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has also greatly impacted diplomatic efforts at conflict resolution over the past 70-plus years. From uninterventions to US-led talks, the conflict has continually resisted outside attempts to broker peace. What efforts have been made and what challenges do they face? Since 1948, the UN has passed hundreds of resolutions related to mediating the conflict, sending peacekeeping forces, and addressing Palestinian refugee rights among other issues. However, deep divisions between members like the US and Arab states often hamper UN initiatives. The US has taken the leading role in direct negotiations since the 1970s. For example, the 1978 Camp David Accords mediated by Jimmy Carter led to a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. In 1993, the Oslo Accords between Israel and Palestinian leaders created limited Palestinian self-rule in Gaza and the West Bank. However, a final peace agreement has remained elusive. Disagreements over Israeli settlements, statehood, and other issues have hindered US diplomacy. But why has resolving the conflict through diplomacy proved so complex? A few key factors stand out. There is deep distrust between Israelis and Palestinians after decades of violence. Within both societies, nationalist hardliners resist compromise, and the asymmetry of power between the two sides has allowed Israel to dictate terms favoring the status quo. Together, these realities have repeatedly dashed diplomatic hopes. Impact on global security and terrorism. Finally, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has significantly impacted global security and terrorism over the past few decades. The conflict has fueled regional instability, providing opportunities for extremist groups. It has also perpetuated perceptions of Western bias that help drive radicalization. What has been the fallout? Groups like Hamas and Hezbollah have harnessed Palestinian grievances to bolster their violent resistance campaigns against Israel as well as terrorist attacks abroad. Al-Qaeda and ISIS propaganda have cited Palestinian suffering to rally anti-Western sentiment and recruit foreign fighters to the region. And diaspora Palestinians in Europe have at times been implicated in militant plots. Beyond terrorism, the conflict has impacted security more broadly. Spillover wars like the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982 have destabilized the region. Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal has also triggered fears of a Middle East arms race, and the conflict has diverted international attention and resources from other pressing security issues. In essence, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict hasn't just pitted Israelis against Palestinians. It has provided ammunition to extremists, distracted global efforts, and inspired violence worldwide. Responses of major countries. The role of the United States looms large. It has been a stalwart ally of Israel since its founding in 1948, providing billions in annual military and financial aid. In 2022 alone, the U.S. gave over $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel. It has also used its veto power on the United Nations Security Council 53 times against resolutions critical of Israel, more than any other nation. And it contributes over $500 million in aid each year to the Palestinian Authority. Some argue this lopsided support of Israel has stymied progress on peace negotiations, but others claim it has brought stability and security to Israel amid a tumultuous region. There is truth to both perspectives. While America's backing has emboldened Israel's policy, it has also deterred attacks by its neighbors. The U.S. has also brokered milestone agreements like the Camp David and Oslo Accords, laying groundwork for a two-state solution. But its overwhelming support for Israel, coupled with global sway and military might, has ultimately hindered the compromises and concessions needed for lasting peace. While the U.S. has taken the hardest line in support of Israel, other major powers approach the conflict differently. The European Union is the largest donor of aid and trading partner to the Middle East broadly. It provides around €10 billion in assistance each year and has annual trade with the region exceeding €200 billion. The EU officially advocates a two-state solution with an independent Palestine alongside Israel. It has repeatedly called for constructive dialogue and compromise from both sides, but its progressive rhetoric has led to little real progress. Some criticize the EU's stances as lofty idealism untethered from the bleak realities on the ground. The EU lacks the global clout and unity of purpose to compel change in the region through soft power alone. While its aid and economic ties are substantial, they come with few concrete demands or conditions. And differences among EU member states limit a forceful, coordinated approach. The EU's sympathetic ear and copious aid have bolstered the Palestinian government, but its nuanced policies have done little to curb Israel's assertive unilateralism or rally the Palestinians around political reform. Meanwhile, powers like Russia and China play a complementary role, jockeying for influence through hard-nosed military and economic levers. Russia has long aided key regional allies like Syria and Iran, sending billions in arms shipments and military personnel. China has rapidly expanded its economic clout, investing heavily in regional oil and gas reserves and infrastructure projects. In 2022, Russia's trade with the Middle East exceeded $20 billion, while China's surpassed $250 billion. Russia and China's ties in the region are driven less by ideology than by cold calculus, securing resources and countering the sway of Western nations. Despite vastly different aims and approaches, it's clear the US, EU, Russia, and China all influence the Middle East conflict in major ways. Their competing interests complicate prospects for peace. The long history of war and mistrust makes constructive dialogue a monumental challenge. There are no easy solutions for a fractured region with global implications. Major powers have clashed for leverage while Palestinians and Israelis suffer the consequences. A lasting peace will require carefully balancing these complex dynamics and power struggles. With so much at stake, we must not surrender to fatalism despite the daunting road ahead. Progress, however halting, remains possible if we understand the multifaceted web of interests impeding and propelling it. Where do we go from here? While a solution has remained elusive thus far, global engagement with this conflict is as important as ever. With growing calls to address Palestinian rights violations, Israel's deepening isolation, and the ever-present threat of violence, the status quo faces increasing pressure. Where do we go from here? The international community can promote positive steps forward. Third parties should emphasize that the window for a two-state compromise, however difficult, is closing. More can also be done to defend Palestinian human rights, fight unlawful policies like settlements, and alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza created by the blockade. Arab states can also take more initiative. Their involvement is vital for pressuring Palestinian militant groups to disarm and bringing Israel to the table. Finally, citizens worldwide have a role to play. By educating ourselves on the complex histories and issues involved, we can advocate more effectively for a just outcome benefiting both peoples. The path to peace will not be easy or quick, but with global unity and moral courage, a more peaceful future for Israelis and Palestinians is possible. This conflict has already shaped our world in profound ways. Perhaps one day, its resolution will inspire our world even more. The stakes are high, but the opportunity lies before us. In closing, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has had far-reaching impacts on the world over the past 70-plus years. It has influenced international politics and alliances, challenged global diplomacy and security, and resisted resolution despite intense outside engagement. While the way forward remains challenging, a just outcome benefiting both peoples is possible with global cooperation. By learning from the successes and failures of the past, we can create a better future. The conflict may be local, but its lessons are global, and they remind us that with understanding and perseverance, even the most bitter divides can one day be bridged. As we've seen, pursuing peace requires comprehending this complex web. It demands moving beyond rhetoric and assuming good faith on all sides. Progress never comes easily when global interests collide, but it can come incrementally through struggle and understanding. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Follow along as we continue examining intricate global issues and unpacking paths to peace. The road ahead remains long. We'll catch you in the next video.